The greatest discovery of our generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind. This is a quote by one of the founders of psychology, William James. And I thought this was a great start to lay the foundation for today's conversation, where we are talking everything how mental health impacts our finances. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode on My Money Adventures podcast, where we talk everything personal finance, well-being, and of course, wealth creation. If you're new to the channel, my name is Tukiso TK Ntebe, and on this channel, like I mentioned, we talk everything on how to improve our well-being. Today's conversation, as we celebrate and wrap up the Mental Health Awareness Month celebrated in the United States of America, we are talking how mental health impacts our finances. And in studio, I have a dear friend of mine, colleague, and of course, a trailblazer of note, where we are unpacking how our finances and mental health are related. As is tradition on the show, I don't introduce my guests, they introduce themselves. So, Melebo, for people who don't know you, how would you describe who you are? Tell us a bit about who you are and what you would like the viewers, fellow trailblazers, to know.
As a Mosotho, that's how I would usually introduce myself. But I'm a counseling psychologist in private practice. Have been practicing for just about 15 years now. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm doing currently here in Maseru, Lesotho.
Okay. Before, I know this was not on the discussions we had, and I did that deliberately, right? Mm-hmm. So how would you describe, this is Money Adventures with TK, Money Adventures podcast. So we always talk about money and our relationship with money. Mm-hmm. How would you describe your relationship with money? What does money mean to you?
The first thing that comes to mind is limitless.
That's interesting. I've never heard that on the podcast before, but limitless. Okay, unpack.
And that doesn't mean that I have like abundance or more than enough, but I think growing up in Lesotho, sometimes there can be limitations in the way that we think about money. But I think I've had so many opportunities and been blessed enough to have access sometimes. And therefore, the way that I think about it, and that can be unhealthy sometimes, mm-hmm. because you can overspend, forgetting that you don't have any money at the same time. So I'm married to an economist, and I think he's the one that helps me to keep in check, mm-hmm. and helps in terms of keeping the tab on most of the stuff. Mm-hmm. But that's how I'd like to. I feel like there's more than enough to go around, mm-hmm. as long as it's well managed.
Mm-hmm. I love how you're really tying that to William James's mind approach or coding abundance, how you think about certain things. I often speak about the money mindset, the abundance mindset, and I think what you just touched on now really speaks to how you think about money, how you speak about money, and the possibilities that money can provide can become limitless. Yeah. I like that. All right. So you are a counseling psychologist, right? But before we even get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation, maybe talk us through your journey. I know you have registered the Psychological Wellness Center Lesotho, PWCL. So talk us through what the company does and how you founded the company.
Oh yeah, it all started about almost 10 years now.
Okay.
Back in West Africa. We had an amazing opportunity to be living in North Africa for 4 years. I was home not doing anything. Even though I had already qualified by then. But then I was in an Arabic Francophone country, and as you know, with many professions, people may have different tools, but with us, we are the tool. Our language is the tool. So when you're in an environment where you can't speak the language, I didn't speak any French at that point in time, I decided when we're relocating to West Africa, I'm just gonna hit the ground, running. And then I started working with the Anglophone community that was there and needed those services because there wasn't any English speaking. Mm-hmm. A psychologist at that point in time. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying this because 10 years back, I had not planned to be in private practice.
Sure.
I thought I still needed more experience. I need to, be in the working world, and then I'll start private practice later on when I've aged and I know everything about, mental health, which I don't think anyone can ever know everything. But circumstances forced me to do that. So when we relocated back home about 5 years back, I just continued. It was just easy to continue with private practice here in Lesotho. So we offer psychotherapy. And I know once we talk about psychotherapy, we're thinking treatment, we're thinking mental health conditions. But of course, psychology is not just about dealing with pathology, even though that makes the bulk of the work that we do. So it's for individuals, sorry, it's for couples, it's for families, but also another important aspect is that we work with corporate. So it could be for professional development, there's team building, there could be crisis management that happens in organizations. So we always come in and try to manage that. There's a lot of restructuring that happens in organization. We help the companies just to be able to transition in a well way, even though they're going through a difficult time. And I think that's what psychotherapy, whether for an individual or for corporate or for family, does.
I love that. And I love the tagline here, the Psychological Wellness Center Lesotho, a holistic support for your well-being. So when you speak about the individual, the couple, the family, or the corporate, it really means it's quite holistic. So with the sessions that we have done previously, conversations we've had, before we can even talk about mental health, I know how passionate you are about psychoeducation, right? So just to lay the ground rules and just to get people to understand the different aspects of psychotherapy, right? So maybe let's start with what's the difference between a psychologist? I know there are different types of psychologists, so maybe just unpack and explain to us how I know which psychologist does what at any point in time.
Okay, I think you're right in saying that. I think as a Mosotho, as a Black and African psychologist, I think it's very important because the profession in itself is foreign. It all started in the Western world, and it's important to say, how do we adapt that into our context? And I think psychoeducation is very important for our people, our communities to be able to understand what it's all about, but also just to educate so that, when I'm about to have a baby, for example, as a pregnant woman, I know that I'm going to go see a gynecologist. Once the baby is born, I'm going to go see a pediatrician. Once I have mental health issues, then from the medical point of view, I'm going to go see a psychiatrist. So in terms of the differences, in a nutshell, psychiatrists are medical doctors that have general medicine training, but then after that training, they specialize in mental health, just like gynecologists will specialize in gynecology, cancer people, in oncology, and all of that. And these are medical doctors that can prescribe medication. They do a bit of psychotherapy, even though it's not holistically and to the extent that a psychologist do. But when it comes to psychologists, we train mental health from day one. We'll have your undergraduate, and I'm talking in the South African context, undergraduate, your honors, and then your master's degree. At master's level, that's when we start specializing. So you could either go into clinical psychology, educational psychology, counseling psychology. And then with regards to the Health Professions Council of South Africa, the HPCSA, in the UK, it's the HCPC. In the US, the APA, the American Psychiatric Association. The models are all the same, but I'll focus on the South African one because we are based here. So there will be 6 categories in terms of registration. I've already mentioned those 3. Then there's the neuro, there's the research, and there's the industrial one. So those are the different categories. I know a lot of people, we get calls, I want to see a child psychologist. You will find that the 3 categories, clinical, counseling, and educational, mostly work with children in terms of in private practice. So those are the differences in terms of who is a psychiatrist. And I think it's important for an individual to know, who do I go to see when and why am I seeing that person? So the difference between these the 6 categories that I talked about is the scope of practice. How far do you go according to the training? What environment? Educational psychologists, for example, would be in school context. Counseling psychologists, we say we work with more well-adapted people, where there's clinical psychologists tend to be more in psychiatric facilities. Research, of course, is more in academia, industrial, in corporate, even though there's a lot of overlap.
I love that, because a lot of people get confused between the different types of psychologists and a psychiatrist, and you never know where to go, really. You never know who to speak to or who to ask for help. And the other, I don't want to even call it a buzzword in this context, but there is this trend where people talk about the childhood trauma this, trauma that. How do we define trauma, and when does trauma become important or a topic of discussion?
Trauma is right at the center of mental health or even conditions that people experience. We always like to talk about big T trauma and little t trauma. The big T trauma, we are talking about experiences that people go through that are stressful, that you find difficult to cope with. It's really distressing. So it would be incidences like an accident, for example. It happened once off, that's acute trauma. And not because it's minor, but it's because it's just one incident that happened. Then you will have what we call chronic trauma, where you'll find it's repetitive trauma and prolonged. So one person could be in an abusive relationship. That is some form of trauma. Domestic violence, for example. It doesn't happen only once. It happens over time and then over a period of time. We also have complex trauma happening multiple times. It can also be prolonged and it's more intensive. I always think of, for example, military people who experience PTSD. They've been exposed to war and go through a lot while they are there. So in a nutshell, an experience that happens that really makes it very stressful and is distressing to one and make it difficult for somebody to cope. Now when we talk about little t trauma, and I know it may be small things that we don't even think about, a loss of a job, for example, that can be very frustrating. We can have sleepless nights because I don't have a job, and no job means finances being affected. Loss of a relationship, not belonging to a certain group or feeling rejected. They may seem like it's minor things and we don't even consider them to be traumatic. And yet they are affecting our mental health and our mind because we get to worry about them. No man is an island, we all want belonging. So how do I feel treated in the environment that I am? So in a nutshell, that is why I'm saying trauma is right at the core of our mental well-being and some of the challenges and conditions that we may experience, because we may end up having anxiety, depression because of the trauma experiences that we went through.
I love how you also positioned the next question really, really well. And I think just to amplify and build on what you just said is, what is mental health? I think a lot of us have so many conversations about my mental health, but from a psychologist's point of view, also taking into consideration the training, we say from day one in psych studies, you are doing mental health. What is mental health?
I always like for us to start by distinguishing health and illness. Those are two different things. Mental health is the state of well-being, where, of course, it's also about awareness, but we're looking at our emotional well-being, we're looking at our behavioral well-being, we're looking at our social well-being, where I can be able to realize even the things that my capabilities, for example, be able to have good relationships, be able to have healthy boundaries in those relationships, and be able just to function in community holistically. And once that well-being has been tampered with, it means that there can be a presentation now of an illness, a disorder, a condition, if you may. So in a nutshell, that is how we describe mental health.
Sure. I love that definition. As a financial advisor, I work with a lot of clients, and I've started to realize through experiences that there's a link between financial and mental health, which you also touched on a bit earlier on. So a lot of my clients come through, they've either experienced loss of income, loss of their jobs, they have been retrenched. And how does mental health, in fact, how does the finances impact mental health? I know you've already touched a bit on it earlier on, but just to deepen that conversation, what's the link between financial and mental health, and how does finances impact one's mental health?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is the moment you realize you don't have money, sleepless nights, You're thinking, even if it's not a necessity, let's say it's want. I know you love travel, you know, with your podcast and everything, which is really beautiful. I also love traveling, you know that. So whenever I know that there's a trip coming up, and then I don't have the finances to go to, I start worrying a bit. That's just something that is very light, let alone now when I can't have bread to put on the table, let alone when I have mortgages and loans to pay off, what's going to happen. So you start thinking, of course, worrying, and your mind is working on extra time thinking. So you start experiencing insomnia. The relationships are affected. If I've, for example, have a loan, whether with in a bank or even with family members and friends, what's going to happen to those relationships when I can't be able to pay? That's when the social aspect. We always look at holistically the biopsychosocial model when we're talking in psychology. It affects many different areas. So yes, money is here, it's tangible, but the effects of it, because of it is a means for the resources that we need. If I can't get hold of those resources, then what happens? It brings a lot of stress, it brings a lot of worry. We're talking about now the trauma, and that's where everything begins. So it's very important to be able to realize that even though I may not see it contextually, but once I start to worry about not having money, it's affecting me psychologically. That in turn affects me even physiologically, because if I'm having insomnia, sleepless nights, what's going to happen, you know, to my body? So all of that are intertwined and we can't separate them.
Sure. As you're speaking now, I'm starting to see my own signs. You know, lack of sleep, constantly worrying, especially if you're in business or employed, constantly worrying about salaries, rent, and all those external things. And because of COVID-19, a lot of people have literally experienced a lot in the last few years. We've done workshops where people were retrenched, right? We've done workshops where people took pay cuts and so on and so forth, right? But in the same light, we are promoting, I know for us as financial advisors, we're promoting people to have multiple streams of income, you know, because relying on one source of income can become dangerous, especially in the light of the economy currently.
Yeah.
But what are the dangers that we need to be thinking about as we are exploring all these multiple streams of income? I know for one, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My brain is constantly on overdrive. And when I should be sleeping, getting quality sleep, I sometimes wake up with very puffy eyes. I slept, but I didn't rest. So how important is it to take care of our mental health as we are pursuing multiple streams of income? Also taking into consideration burnout.
Yeah. I think it's always a good thing, and I think from the financial point of view, not having one income stream, it's really good. However, how do I make sure that I'm still here even tomorrow? Going beyond the line of duty, pushing yourself, when you're starting a business, investing time, having sleepless nights, it's all important. It's part of having a foundation in anything that you do. We know it's the hardest part of building. But at least we know it's seasonal. Having a foundation and building the building, it's two different things.
True.
So what is it that you're doing? There's this, one of my favorite psychologists, Jack Canfield, always says, make sure that in your life you don't have more than 6 things on your plate.
Sure, 6.
Family already counts.
Okay.
Your practice already counts. And in your practice, you'll find you'll have multiple things. Then there's projects that you do. So what do you have on your plate, and what boundaries do you have? Do you keep saying yes, yes, yes to everything? I think starting with the end in mind and knowing where you're going is very important. But also it's important to remember you always have to have the oxygen mask on yourself. You know the scenario when you're flying and they say even if you're traveling with a child, when there's an emergency and the oxygen masks come down, what do? You do not assist the child first. Yes, we grab the mask, but we don't help the child first. You help yourself first. Why? In a split second, if the oxygen shortage in the brain, you're going to collapse.
Sure.
Can the child help you? No. But the chances are you're in a better position to be able to do that. In corporate context, I always say, like I said, there's nothing wrong with going beyond a line of duty. But having an emergency, or your boss having an emergency every weekend when it's supposed to be time off, that's lack of boundaries. It's not healthy. And the reality is, when I do workshops in corporate, I always say, have you guys lost anyone, for example?
Did anybody die?
Did anybody die? And you will find yes. Then the next question is, how long does HR take to replace that position? Some of them even say, even before the funeral.
Personally, just to jump in there, I was working for one particular corporate, and we heard about the passing of a colleague. And I think before the funeral even happened, the advert was out because life had to go on. So when you say this, it really gets me thinking to say it's good to show up and to be present and to go beyond the call of duty, but also finding that balance to say, let me not overexert myself at the risk of my mental health.
Exactly.
That is powerful.
Your organization can replace you, but can your family replace you? And I think that there's nothing wrong with the organization doing. Of course, there's still a bit of sensitivity and a personal touch. HR, industrial psychologists will know that. But at the same time, the corporate is doing their role because life still has to go on. But what is it that you're doing? And good organizations that really apply good employee assistance programs, you will find that the first thing that they do is to take care of their employees because they don't consider them as just, resources and cows that they can just milk. But they know that the more they invest in them, the more they are in a good state to have more productivity. And it's a win-win situation where the employees are happy, the organization is happy.
Sure.
So take care of yourself, make sure that you put that oxygen mask on yourself without saying, I can't do anything extra, but at the same time, first, then take care of everybody else.
Sure. Okay. So at which point, earlier on, you mentioned the difference between illness and health and illness, right? So at which point do we start talking about mental health illness? When does it, what are the signs when that transition happens from health to illness?
I think it's even important for us you're talking about transition, TK. We don't have to wait, until things are really in a bad position. It's always good. Prevention is good. It's always good to mitigate before things get worse. So immediately, for example, you're starting to talk about insomnia. We always say there's a difference between clinical illness. For example, let's talk about depression. You know how we always use the word depression loosely? Oh, I'm so depressed today. Oh, this and that. Yes, there's that. But when we say I'm so depressed today, it's the kind of depression that I can just snap out of it. Tomorrow I'll feel better. I feel bad today because something happened. But when we're talking about clinical depression, we're now talking about a condition that will need psychotherapy treatment. Sometimes even psychopharmacology, the medication needs to be involved in that. So we just, first of all, need to be able to draw the line. Yes, the symptoms may look alike. So for example, if I used to be interested in playing tennis, going out, and now I start to isolate myself, having sleepless nights, those are some of the red flags that you may start observing that something is off. Hopelessness, feeling like, why are we even on this earth? That's how depression shows, because what's the point of living beyond today? So we don't even have to wait. I always say, it's not everything, for example, that needs psychological or professional intervention. You get a cough here, we make our concussions, but when that cough doesn't go away, it means it could be something major, some form of infection or viral something. So I just need to be able to say, when I can't treat it myself, it can't be helped even with the help of family, because support is very important, friends is very important. It's good to be vulnerable with people that you know they will be there. We also look for that even in psychotherapy to say what are the pillars, because we don't want to keep clients in therapy. So even when you see those minor signs, don't wait until it's worse. But when you're already at that point where you know now it's a condition, it's an illness, it's a disorder, I need to be able to seek help. Once I see this thing, I can't just brush it off. I've had this for 3 years. I see people who will say, I've just been unhappy and it's been happening. I can't even say why, because sometimes depression could be chemical imbalance in the brain. Sometimes it could be because of the event. So it may be minor things, but it's important. We call psychotherapy the talking cure. So it's important to be able to talk about things, but when you realize the symptoms are not getting away, then get professional help.
I think I want to ask another question, particularly because in our line of work, especially in our line of work, whether it's from psychotherapy or financial wellness, is we do deal with a lot of corporate clients and employees, right? So there's probably an employee somewhere, let's call her Ntabiseng Kapoetsi, who is feeling, they keep showing up to work, but they really have been feeling very unhappy at work. What advice do we, what strategies can we give them just so that they keep showing up?
I think it's important for us as people, we sometimes just allow life to happen without reflecting and stopping. One, some of the professions we got into just for the sake of you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For financial gain. But I need to be able to say, why am I not happy all of a sudden? Was I ever happy? Do I even stop to think, who am I? Where am I going? What do I want in life? And, you know, what is happening? At the beginning of the year, I always share this, that I copied this from a wonderful friend from Uganda who used to go on solo retreats at the beginning of the year. I was like, by yourself?
By yourself.
What do you do when you get there for the whole week? And she's like, I plan. She's a Christian, so she'll be like, I plan, I pray, I do my work for the year, I do my planning for my company and all of those things. And sometimes I know we'll meet people just about to retire and they're like, I don't even know what I want in life. And there's still people who take the opportunity to reinvent themselves, to say, I was an accountant, I realized I did this because of the situations at that point in time. I didn't even have career guidance. Why am I not happy? So I need to be able to say, is it something that is external? Does it have to do anything with work? Is my work environment healthy? What does my HR say about, you know, EAP programs and all of that? So I know I can't answer it directly, but we need to be able to say, what is the cause? So start with yourself, have time to reflect, have time with yourself, talk to people that you trust, and get to the core of it. Because, I mean, even in therapy, of course, we are trained to be able to get to the root, but with everything, once you uproot it, then the leaves and the fruits just wither and die.
Sure. I think this is a masterclass, and these fellow trailblazers, you guys are so lucky to be hearing this firsthand on My Money Adventures podcast. So, Melebo, mental health couples, psychotherapy in Lesotho is still very big. Still very much a taboo, right? You and colleagues within the psychology landscape, industry, market, I don't know what the correct term is, have established the Lesotho Psychologists Society. So maybe just unpack, and I'm asking this question from a context here, somebody who's watching this episode. Number one, they should come to the Psychological Wellness Center Lesotho for sessions. Two is if they also want to know a bit more about psychology, whether as a career or whether as anything about psychology, talk us through a bit about what the Lesotho Psychological Society does.
So let me just go back a little bit to say, I think in 2008, when I graduated and came back home, I was even wondering whether I'll be able to work as a psychologist or I'll just be hired at a bank or whatever any student with a first degree does. But I had a great opportunity to work for a pediatric clinic here and to be able to work as a psychologist, and it was such a lovely experience to have that. And I realized also that there weren't a lot of psychologists in the country. Even when I came in private practice, coming back from West Africa, private practice can be very isolating. You are in business, you know how it can be like. So you start looking for other professionals that are out there. So there are people, and of course there's different categories. You will have your counselors, you will have your psychologist, you will have your psychiatrist, which is very unfortunate because we don't have even a lot in Lesotho. I can only I can't even count the whole hand, you know, in terms of psychiatrists. But with psychologists, there's a few people that are in the country that we decided to say, guys, as clinicians, let's come together. You know how the saying of Barack Obama, we are the ones that we've been waiting for.
Sure.
We can't wait for somebody to come and start this. So we are in the process of trying to establish a body that will help to promote the profession in the country and standardize also, because there's a lot of malpractice also that is happening out there that we need to be able to say, it's good for all of us to have hands on the deck. Even if people are not mental health professionals, it's good to be advocates and do the work that you're doing, but never go beyond the scope of practice, because you can do a lot of damage while you're trying to help. So the psychological society is trying to say, how do we build psychologists in the country? And we're even making a call for people out there that they know that they're either clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, educational, industrial, that are qualified to be able to say, let's come and build. We are just starting, and we will be out there knocking on different doors, medical council and different people, to say, help us, we are here. How do we build together?
There's something that you said that really stuck with me, standardization. And I think a lot of industries need to get to a point where people within that industry come together, collaborate, and standardize, so that we avoid malpractice, so that we avoid hurting and damaging people. It also helps us root out the people who are not qualified to be in that space, So a big shout out to the Lesotho Psych Society. Right, so I know, continuing with the Lesotho Psych Society, there's a lot of events that, and as new as you guys are, there's a lot of events that you guys do. So maybe just highlight a few that we can expect for this year, and some of the ones that you have done previously. And then, let us know what you guys are up to.
Yeah. In the previous times, what we have tried to do, because of lack of resources, we need to be practical. We don't want to end up being bankrupt. We were focusing mainly on the 10th of October, which is the Mental Health Day, and the week that comes before that, the Mental Health Week. But for example, in other countries, like now in the US, May is part of Mental Health Awareness Month. I know the UK is on board even on that. This is another opportunity for us to be out there. But because of lack of resources, so we try to commemorate and have events around that time. So we have had like a commemoration where we'll have a panel of psychologists and the public will come ask questions. We have had that even on social media. So last year, for example, we had, what do you call it?
Webinar.
A webinar,
yeah.
Thank you for that. A webinar where we had a panel of psychologists, and even this year, and the cry from last year was that, guys, you can't wait for one day. In a year, because we experience this every single day of our lives. So it's very important for us to try, but also minding the resources. So even this year, in the month of June, which is just next month, we're planning to have another webinar where we'll have people come and talk about anything mental health. Of course, suicide is very rife, for example, in the country at this point in time. We're looking to look at suicide. Substance use, it's also another challenge that I know our young people are going through. So we're trying to look at, how do we help in our community and the issues that they're dealing with. And of course, for the 10th of October, WHO usually gives a theme. For example, mental health is a universal right, and it should be, just like education for everyone. So those are the things that we'll be doing to focus. And of course, we're still growing. We need a lot of support. Of course, we realize this is our baby. We need to be in the forefront, but we're only doing what we can manage at this point in time. So in a nutshell, that is what we're working on.
If you are a corporate and looking for an initiative to invest in and to sponsor, the Lesotho Psychological Wellness Center is where it's at. All right, May, as we close the conversation, what can we expect for people who like to book and consult with the Psychological Wellness Center, especially corporates who are looking for resources? Who are looking for initiatives to help improve productivity, to invest in the well-being from an employee assistance program. How do they connect with PWCL?
I think it's very important, and TK, when you say that, because we said we're not only dealing with pathology. Of course, as an individual, as families, as couples, if you're looking to get help or guidance or support, or even just for professional and personal development, is very important. So we are based here in Maseru, Lesotho. By the main traffic circle, there's a building there called Moonstar Complex. We're in consulting room 15.
And of course, all the contact details will be on the screen below, and I'll also plug the website in the description notes below. And any other closing remarks before we wrap up the conversation? Thank you so much for opening up so much and educating us on psychotherapy. Any closing remarks?
Thank you, Ndade. I think in the mental health space, especially with a lot of stigma sometimes, which I think Basotho are really starting to come up, onto the table with regards to mental health. We always say it's okay to not be okay, so that we can be able to find ways to get help, to deal with it. And that research has shown there's a lot of recovery, as opposed to back in the days where when you have a certain mental health illness, you're likely to deal with it. But there's a lot of research and many treatment therapies that are there to be able to help literally until people get to remission. So it's okay to not be okay. Get help when you need to.
It's okay not to be okay. Get help when you need to. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening till this point in the video and podcast. This episode is proudly brought to you by TKO Financial Wellness and Advisory. This is a licensed financial planning firm by the Central Bank of Lesotho. And of course, I'll plug the video if you don't know what TKO Consultancy and Financial Wellness does right after this moment.
We will help you navigate the complexities of managing finances. Imagine tailored financial solutions and transformative educational programs designed to eradicate financial uncertainty. We aren't just consultants, we are dedicated partners accompanying you on your journey to financial freedom. TKO Financial Wellness, where your success is our decisive victory.
But also remember that this episode is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Do not forget to follow us on all social media platforms, My Money Adventures Academy, and of course, TKO Financial Wellness and Advisory, and me, TK Ntebe, the Finance Bachelor. And of course, we do have, I say of course a lot, we do have a learning portal, mymoneyadventures.com, for all your personal finance blogs, videos, podcasts, and online courses. So be sure to check that out. I'll also link it in the show notes below. Do not forget to get a copy of our amazing products. In particular, Let's Change the Script, Chaleta Sepasele, a personal finance book written in the Lesotho context. And I do think there's a chapter on mental health and the relationship between financial well-being. And last but not least, remember to hit the subscribe button, leave your comments below, and let us know what you think about this episode. And a big shout out to the team behind the camera. In studio, we have Titan Lens Photography, and I see my other photographer, Katiso, who's also here. I love the collaboration between the creatives. And thank you so much for coming through and sharing amazing insights and value add. A big shout out to the Psychological Wellness Center. So I hope more business, in particular corporate business, will come. We need those workshops. I will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you. Remember, money is an adventure. Let's enjoy the ride. But while enjoying the ride, take care of your mental health and take care of your finances. Love, peace, and happiness. Signing out. Cheers.